Good afternoon, Patriot pals. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day and God bless you. Let's get into the news. At some point, accountability is going to rear its ugly head. And you know what I think accountability might be here, and it might be served under the name of Paul Sperry. Many of you guys are familiar with Paul Sperry. He's a journalist. We've covered many of his investigative reports over the years. Last year, we covered the banning of his Twitter account. And a couple of days ago, thanks to Elon Musk in the Twitter files, we learned that the request to ban Paul Sperry came directly from Adam Schiff's office, or Paul Sperry now responds as claiming that Adam Schiff broke the law, which I certainly think is correct. And he is planning a lawsuit. Things are getting real, folks. The Biden administration is being sued. And now so is Adam Schiff. And even beyond that, Kevin McCarthy is being pressured into starting a new church-style committee. Things are getting real, and this might just be the year of accountability. Alright, folks. Take a look at this: how Democrat Adam Schiff abused his power to demand I be kicked off of Twitter simply due to a personal vendetta written by Paul Sperry. Back from holiday vacation, I found an interesting email waiting for me in my inbox from Matt Taibbi, the independent journalists that Elon Musk tasked with reviewing and releasing internal Twitter documents about decisions to censor content and banned users from the platform. Paul Taibbi wrote, "Just found a crazy email on Twitter. Did you know that Adam Schiff staff asked Twitter to have you banned? This is context that we covered the other day, so hopefully you guys are up to date. But essentially, there's an official internal Twitter email directly from Adam Schiff's office asking the social media platform to ban Paul Sperry. They initially refused and then a couple of days later banned him anyway. I was gobsmacked. This would explain why Twitter could never give me a reason for suspending my account, even though I had broken none of its rules." The powerful Democrat chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence made his request to ban me through his staff in a November 2020 memo to Twitter 3 months later in early February 2021. I was kicked off the platform. Why would a congressional leader sworn to protect the Constitution and First Amendment want to muzzle a veteran journalist like authoritarians everywhere? Shifted not like critical reporting. The man who vowed to protect our democracy from Donald Trump wanted to censor the free press in articles for real, clear investigations. I outed his anonymous whistleblower from the first impeachment of President Donald Trump. I named that we literally cannot say on this damn platform talk about free speech, so we'll have to blur out that name. But of course you guys know exactly who it is, a Democrat who had worked in the Trump White House as an Obama holdover. I also exposed this individual's prior relationship with one of Schiff's top staffers on the impeachment committee. My reporting cast fresh doubts on Schiff's claims that the 2019 impeachment process happened organically. The New York Times had already busted Schiff lying about prior contacts with whistleblower. Initially, Schiff publicly stated that his office never spoke with the whistleblower before he filed his complaint against Donald Trump, when in fact a Schiff staffer had huddled with him, something Schiff spokesman Patrick Boland was forced to admit after the Times broke the story. The staffer was never identified. Prior contacts led to suspicions that Adam Schiff's office helped the whistleblower craft his complaints as part of a partisan operation in the censorship demands Schiff's office sent to Twitter. Misco in the impeachment inquiry are mentioned. It's not clear if the individual is to, since some names are blacked out. Schiff demanded Twitter remove any and all contact related to them. Unlike in other cases where Twitter did censor accounts, officials there originally argued that this quote isn't feasible. In his list of demands, Schiff tried to justify banning me by claiming I was promoting a false QAnon conspiracy, which I have never done, and I challenged Schiff to produce evidence to back up his defamatory remarks. Schiff knew better. He knew QAnon was a trigger for Twitter censors who are suppressing QAnon posts. Even Twitter's liberal gatekeepers appeared skeptical of Schiff's claims. If it is related to QAnon, it should already be de-amplified, and so this is a little bit of a rehashing of previous events. Of course, we all know Adam Schiff's false claims about the whistleblower. We know his deep state schemes to unseat Donald Trump, and now we have direct evidence that Adam Schiff's office used his government seat and his government influence to pressure a social media firm in an effort to ban, suppress, and censor a member of the free press who did nothing wrong, definitely did nothing illegal, was simply reporting on his investigative piece into Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry. Now we're learning New York Post's reporter Paul Sperry is gobsmacked and considering a lawsuit after Musk's Twitter file suggests Adam Schiff tried to get him banned. And what I have to say is, do it right again. Do it. These lawsuits need to continue piling up. No more can the Democrats and their adjacent allies get away with their shadow operations. their unconstitutional actions, their defamation, libel, and slander. Paul Sperry clearly believes he has a case. I believe he does as well. And so I say do it. Actually, here's a Twitter thread from Paul Sperry, getting into some of the details about his perspective on his potential case against Adam Schiff. This is the oath that Adam Schiff violated. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution, including the First Amendment, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Developing 600th Press Corps, including Washington Post and Politico, have failed to cover congressional leader Adam Schiff strong-arming Twitter to ban a journalist, abridging press freedom and free speech, despite the smoking gun email released from Twitter files protecting a prominent Democrat representative. Adam Schiff abused Article 1 of the Constitution, which states Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It's got to happen. It's now or never. We have the evidence, and so it's time to take action, following in the steps of Alex Berenson. For those of you guys who are unaware, Alex Berenson is the person who successfully sued Twitter. Twitter was then forced to reinstate his account. While again, thanks to the Twitter files, we learned that the Biden administration directly requested Twitter to ban Alex Berenson. He was then banned a couple days later. Well, Alex Berenson, as we know, is suing the Biden administration. Alex Berenson says he is going to sue the Biden administration for pressuring Twitter to ban him. Just do it. Paul Sperry should do the same. And if it all happens at once, Adam Schiff getting sued, Biden being sued, and the Church Committee all in one shot, well, then 2023 is going to be one heck of a year. And honestly, what I'm really hoping for is for the Republican House to show some courage, do the right thing, and issue subpoenas to all social media companies, because it wasn't just Twitter. And it still isn't just Twitter. I don't really want to rehash what happened last year specifically to my channel, but it was a very scary time for us here at the liberal hive mind. That's basically what I'll say. And it happened right around the same time. The same timeline that we're seeing from all of these internal documents at Twitter. Was the FBI were prominent Democrats? And was the Biden administration involved, is my question. We deserve answers. There needs to be transparency and accountability. And there needs to be some sort of legal repercussion. Otherwise, Democrats and their federal allies will feel emboldened to just continue on subverting the Constitution with their mass censorship campaigns and beyond. There has to be a stop to these abuses of power. And so we're counting on Alex Berenson, Paul Sperry, and House Republicans to stand up and do the right thing. And next news, over the weekend, Brazil's capital erupted into chaos as opponents, their new Marxist president, Lula da Silva, stormed government buildings, inflicting damage on the presidential palace, as well as their very controversial Supreme Court, which in many ways is at the center of public outrage and distrust. As many of you know, over the last 2 months, mass demonstrations of hundreds of thousands, not millions, have been held across the nation as patriots took to the streets in defiance of last October's presidential election between the nationalist populist president Jair Bolsonaro and the highly corrupt Lula da Silva. What's so important to know here is that back in 2017, Lula was sentenced to 12 years in prison after being convicted in one of the biggest corruption scandals in Brazil's history. Now, so you might be asking again, this is 2023, just 6 years later. So what on earth is Lula doing running for president? Did he run his campaign from jail, akin to how Biden ran it from his basement? Well, this is where the corruption within Brazilian politics begins to break out for all to see. What we have to understand is that in Brazil, it's not the president that's been invested with supreme power, as it were. The president actually is rather limited in terms of his power and influence Brazilian politics. The real power in Brazil resides in their Supreme Court. The court itself is comprised of 11 justices, and of those 11, 7 were appointed by Lula, and some as ideologically left his ilk, like Dilma Rousseff, who took over from Lula a few months back to the shock of millions without any explanation. One of the Supreme Court justices, a fellow who was appointed by Lula forces, overturned Lula's conviction, simply stating that it lacked necessary justification. Moreover, he didn't just overturn the conviction, he nullified. It says if Lula never served a day in jail, and that allowed him to once again run for president. So obviously Bolsonaro supporters who are inclined towards law and order. Your Lula's Brazil. Lula was president for 2 terms a while back. It fell into chaos and violence. Bolsonaro, former army captain, ran on cleaning up corruption, restoring law and order in Brazil. Well, obviously Bolsonaro supporters smell a huge rat in all of this, and they see the whole political and judicial process as corrupt to the core. So when the runoff election came loose back in late October, Lula barely squeaked by 1 percentage point. So needless to say, tens of millions of Brazilian patriots don't buy it. And as you can see, they're still not buying it. The problem in Brazil is that there's no equivalent of an election oversight commission. So the people feel like they just have no recourse to challenge what the Supreme Court Justice did in nullifying Lula's conviction. They have no recourse to address the perceived election irregularities. And so after months of protests this weekend, that frustration obviously boiled over. Now, there are mixed reports coming out, and all of this there are reports of some 400 arrests. There are also reports that both police and military personnel had been largely passive in the midst of this, which suggests that they're actually rather sympathetic with the protesters. Either way, I think you can guess how our shameless leftist legacy media is already framing what happened in Brazil, but we're going to find out that the joke's on them. And we're going to find out precisely why. The American legacy media is, of course, already comparing what happened in Brazil over the weekend to their own weaponized version of J6. It really is sad to see how pathetic these lamestream media types are, how they appear to be so totally incapable of thinking outside of their deliberately polarized frames. But that's not true of everybody within the legacy media. I came across a fascinating take by British journalist Julia Hartley-Brewer, who gets it, who actually gets it. Everyone listen to this, she says. This didn't start with Donald Trump. This did start with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. When the Democrats basically said the election had been stolen by Donald Trump and Russian interference, and she couldn't possibly have lost her Donald Trump unless something nefarious had happened. People having a parade saying, "Not my president, I'm sorry." This started in 2016. In America, it also started in 2016. Here in the UK, when Remainers, not Remain voters, perfectly reasonable to have voted Remain. But Remainers, people who did not accept that result and still try to overturn it, when people who are want to be our next Prime Minister. Hi, Sir Keir Starmer and others actually tried to overturn a legitimate referendum. Fair and Square claims that it was Russians who would influence, claim that we were all stupid, that there have been some sort of dodginess that have gone on. Dodgy money, dodgy this, dodgy that, lies and everything in between, that we hadn't really voted for leaving the EU because we didn't really know what we were voting for. When you make those claims in a democracy, you undermine democracy itself. We didn't have storming of parliament by Remainers, because they thought they were going to get an 80-seat majority. Yeah, exactly what exactly it was turned over. And what was when some British Brexit ears did not go to a storming parliament. They actually did it through the ballot box and waiting patiently, but I'm saying what's happened with Trump. Why happened both scenario? It didn't start, it didn't seem to rise, assaulted on the left. Okay folks, it started on the left. It started on to the that's all we heard for 3.5 freaking years from these very legacy media types, who now actually pretend to be defenders of democratic integrity. 3.5 year 24/7 cable news. The news is tightening around Trump, Russian collusion, Bob Mueller was going to finally bring him down. These people champion tens of millions of tax dollars wasted on a totally useless special investigation. These people who champion the impeachment of a president over a freaking phone call. These people have the gall to present themselves as the defenders of democracy as over and against those authoritarian forces behind JC. We don't live in an age of free press anymore. We live under a press dedicated to imposing a radical cultural Marxist ideology on the masses. The press has become a collective. Walter Duranty, the Russian correspondent for the New York Times decades ago, who deliberately wrote puff pieces about Stalin, he knew they weren't true, but he was so enamored with Stalinism. It didn't matter, because Stalinism was truth, facts be damned. Obviously, we'll be keeping a very close eye on how things develop in Brazil. But as long as the powers that be continue to denigrate and dismiss the electoral concerns of millions, all the while enforcing their own, those powers of be will only end up in the end delegitimizing their own power. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button to watch the next episode.